One of the things I didn't mention in my previous video, mainly the things that I like, is the boss design in Stellar Blade. It makes this rather difficult as most of these are pretty good, very few do anything cheap or unfair, so when it comes to ranking them, it's come down to primarily minor things. Keep in mind, for a boss to count, it has to have a boss health bar, and as for the ones that appear more than once throughout the game, they will be included, but obviously not every version of them. This is based on quality, not difficulty. It is only my opinion, and like I said, most of them are real good. So let's find out how the 17 Stellar Blade bosses stack up.
There will be nothing left of you when I'm finished.
The only boss I really don't like is the unidentified Nighttiba.
Shocking.
It comes down to a few things, most of it is your standard fare, but it has this one attack that is honestly broken, can literally almost kill you if you're not perfect, and given it'll use it over and over again, well, it's kind of unfair. In my case, using a shotgun blast to stop it was mandatory, maybe for you it isn't. And that's okay. But this is something you have to keep buying if you run out, and doing this over and over again because it will be spammed is just not fun. Luckily, you don't have to pay for the normal shots, and that's a good thing, because the boss does this thing when it becomes airborne, and if you don't shoot the balls of light while dodging other attacks that can easily kill you, you're dead. Just dead. Because for whatever reason, making the gun mandatory for this boss was a good idea, as well as having it use this attack up to 2 times. Again, the ammo is free, but it's just annoying. If you make a mistake, you're dead, dodging the attacks feels awkward, and the boss is still very difficult, so it's not a fun combination. I wouldn't call it purely awful, but for a game this good, it's easily last place. One of the bosses you'll encounter on multiple occasions, the Corruptor gets the lowest spot of these for one simple reason. The first encounter is fine, no complaints, the second one is okay too, but the one you may have missed is blatantly badly designed, and I don't know why it exists. Basically, you fight the random charging enemy they threw in while the boss fires shit at you, and success comes down to spamming everything at your disposal until they're both dead. I don't think I need to explain what's wrong with this, but fighting both these at once does not work, and blatantly goes against the game's design. I have no idea why they felt the need to do this. The Corruptor is still the only one that has a health bar, but it's extremely annoying nonetheless, and it's too bad because the other encounters are fine. Despite being projectile-based, it's not unfair at all. It's definitely one of the easier bosses, but this bizarre third encounter, in which if you go here it's not optional, is enough to give it a disappointingly low spot.
Eve, I wish you well.
Adam is the thing you hit until the boss ends. That's kind of the idea. It exists for story purposes. Some people would put it at the bottom automatically, but for me, if I really don't like something, I will put it below, essentially doing nothing. So, similar to Alant and Demon's Souls, it's not the worst thing in the game. If Stellar Blade had more bad bosses, it would be even higher, but luckily it doesn't, so it's pretty solid. Slightly more engaging, and your enjoyment of this will come down to how much you enjoy the shooting sections. I personally don't like them that much, so by default I don't like this that much, but they're not that bad. Unlike Adam, you are actually doing something. The damage you take is still kind of cheap. Doesn't really matter, you're probably not gonna die. Don't think I've ever died to these. Okay for what it is, but something I just want to end.
You're definitely not ordinary.
You know, I really don't like putting another late game boss this low, but like I said, most of these bosses are real good, and for the most part, this one is too. It's all about timing and knowing when to parry, something this game excels at. The fact that your gun is taken away doesn't really affect anything. And it's an exhilarating fight until it decides to spawn in small enemies that relentlessly attack you. They'll sometimes explode, which isn't that bad, but at some point they'll just keep shooting you until you kill them, which isn't always something you can do with the boss attacking you. The way to get past this is to just not mess up the parries, that way you'll have the attacks you need if they spawn in, but the main thing you have to do is simply utilize everything at your disposal to continuously put the boss down so this doesn't happen. In other words, the game isn't really that hard, almost everything has an easy solution, but that's not really the best designed thing, so despite the boss still being okay, it's not one of the best. The first boss you'll fight in the game is perfectly okay for what it is, but obviously it's not going to provide any real challenge, and the second one you can find in the Wasteland is only slightly more difficult. I'm not complaining about that by any means, it's basically tutorial, but for the sake of ranking it has to land somewhere, and the lack of difficulty is not going to put it that high.
I'll put an end to it.
And again, a late game boss has to get a relatively low position, but keep in mind, I don't dislike anything coming up. For this one, it's fine throughout most of it, but towards the end it feels you spend too much time avoiding attacks and not enough time fighting the boss. It's a bit overdone, I wouldn't call it unfair or anything, but I just don't enjoy fighting it as much, and if we look at the late game bosses, it's kind of the least memorable. Nothing about it stands out aside from the space section. That's kind of cool, but I don't really count that. So due to personal enjoyment, I don't enjoy it that much, so it's as high as it gets. And now I have the somewhat hard position of finding things to say about the other 4 bosses that all feel like big enemies. The Behemoth is the boss a lot of people don't seem to know about. It's completely optional, somewhat missable, and is about as difficult as it should be for a boss located deep in the late game area. However, it's also the only boss that's basically a normal enemy with a big health bar. The fact that you can just find these things walking around is kind of disappointing, and it's something the game never did aside from this. There's also only one boss version of this, leading me to question why it's even here. But for literally being a normal enemy, just bigger, it gets the lowest spot of these 4. The next 2 are very similar, good mechanics, proper difficulty, very few things to distinguish them aside from design, but for me, I guess the Stalker is slightly less memorable and a bit less fun, so the 9th spot it is. This one I like a bit more, and is a bit more unique in my opinion. And for anybody who thinks I'm being lazy, when a game actually does things right, and lives by the mechanics they teach you early on, all you can really say is it's well done. You dodge when you're supposed to dodge, parry when you're supposed to parry, and get this, you'll succeed. It's very uncommon that I get mad at this game. It's such a quality product, but for discussing 17 different bosses, it's not the easiest task.
That's not an ordinary enemy.
But of the 4, I give this one the highest spot because it's the first boss you fight that isn't tutorial based, and it does a real good job at being that. Stuff like this has to be balanced perfectly, and it definitely is. It shows off what you'll need to know, how to deal with different attacks, and is probably the coolest looking of all these big enemy bosses. Granted, it's not that challenging, but there is a second one in the Great Desert that honestly looks even cooler. It is tied to a quest, so it's not the easiest thing to get to, but regardless, the boss does exactly what it's supposed to do for the game's first real boss. And if you agree with any of this, you can always hit the like button down below, and consider subscribing if you're not turned off yet. The first boss that's truly unique, the Juggernaut, is pretty good. It's not the most interesting, it does seem to have a lot of delayed attacks, thus being the reason it's only number 6, but it's still enjoyable enough to fight and does present a decent challenge, given you really want to engage it. It is another boss in which you can just spam everything at your disposal and be guaranteed victory. You really don't need to get that good, and that is an issue with a lot of Stellar Blade bosses. This one's definitely well designed, but not the most memorable thing in the game. One of the two possible final bosses, if you only played the game once, you probably fought this one. But for whatever reason, the Elder Nighttiba is one of the easier endgame bosses. The 5 that proceeded, aside from Adam, are all substantially more difficult, but this one I managed to beat in, I think, 3 tries. For a game like this that's actually not ideal, it should be a bit more difficult. It's still a great final boss that has an epic climactic feel, but to do nothing new in terms of challenge makes it the less favorable final boss. Given the story is not the main selling point of this game, I'd recommend picking the other ending. I know I'm saying a lot of negative things about the 5th spot, but that's only because I have to rank them somehow, and it is what it is. It's not bad by any means. If it came earlier, it'd probably be a lot higher, but in the end, being the thing that ends it all off has to count for something. It's still quite good, but despite how it may look, a bit too easy. This boss is quite memorable as you fight it 2 times. The first involving QTEs, but that fight is short-lived, and the true final encounter is one of the more unique in the game. That's because it regains its health 2 times until you automatically find out how to beat it, being blowing it the fuck up, but it stands out for a number of reasons. This one is quite difficult, being a later game boss, it's definitely a step up, and having to fight it 3 times, you'll really have to learn the moveset, as you're not going to be able to skip the whole fight. You can probably skip 1 stage using all of your abilities, but you will have to get kind of good to beat this, and it's a fun boss to get good at. Unique moveset, memorable design, and ending like no other, it's a standout boss for a good reason. Add on the exciting intro, explosive finale, and it sits just outside the top 3.
This is a combat command sent from the colony. Eve! Watch out!
The better final boss, in my opinion. It's just real fun. This is when it gets real hard to find things to say about it. Obviously, it's unique, being the only boss you ever fight in this state, but again, it's everything good about this game done correctly. Nothing extremely cheap, the better you are, the less damage you take. It does make you shoot something, but unlike the other boss, it's a lot more doable. You don't have to dodge stupid shit while shooting, and most important of all, it's quite challenging. This may take you a few tries to beat, it has a unique way of finishing it off, which no other boss in the game does, and even the concept behind the boss is again unique. It's debatable which one one has the better ending. There's actually 2 endings tied to this boss, so it does seem reasonable. But in terms of gameplay, this is the one to pick. It's one of the best in the game, it's also likely you've never fought it, but remember New Game Plus is a thing, and like I said before, it is worth doing, so there you go.
No. There's no way. That's impossible.
In case you're wondering, Taki does not get this position because of the emotional attachment. Again, story is not this game's strong suit. I don't care about a character you see for half a minute. No, the reason this boss is this high is the same reason the last boss is this high and the next boss. It's fun, and no cheap, poor mechanics make it less fun. You can't deny this one feels a bit more climactic. The second stage does ramp up the difficulty. I wouldn't exactly call it hard, but given it's not endgame, it's not gonna be. But it's undeniably fun, I don't have any complaints, it looks cool as shit. And objectively, if you do care about the narrative, that's gonna be a plus too. The plot is quote-unquote advanced after this, but it's the amazing fight, the amazing gameplay, the fun mechanics that give it second place. By now, you probably know what the #1 spot is. This one did get real close, but at one point this game did manage absolute perfection. I would say this one looks the coolest, definitely, but it is missing one little thing.
Lily, I want you to stay back this time. This is my battle.
Well, technically 2 things, but the most important is the difficulty, and Raven is the perfect combination of that and amazing gameplay. I don't know if this is considered the best, but the fact that the hardest one, the one that really makes you get good, is also the best is commendable. I'm gonna cross the line and bring up Elden Ring. The supposed hardest boss in that game is cheap bullshit, get over it. And so are a lot of the game's masterpiece bosses that the obsessed fanboys will constantly fawn over. But this is a perfect boss. It's incredibly difficult, has the hardest moveset to learn, but nothing cheap whatsoever, and is beyond satisfying to master. It looks cool as shit, and is one of the few narrative moments I do kind of care about, being the aforementioned only thing the previous boss didn't have. Just look at the intro.
You don't know anything. You don't know his pain, his anger, his agony. All this talk of you being the chosen one, it ends here.
Given what Raven did, seeing her lose both her arms and get left to watch is pretty damn satisfying. It's somewhat ironic the best boss in the game comes directly after the worst boss in the game, and is technically the same.
Positively shocking.
But who cares, perfection is captured in this battle, easily the best without question, and I will say it, if you're gonna count Stellar Blade as a Souls-like game, it's one of the best Souls-like bosses, period. I honestly don't look at this as a Souls-like, but if the whole thing was like this boss, I probably would. I have no complaints at all, it nails every single aspect of what a challenging boss should be, and the fact that they pulled it off without making it cheap is commendable. Again, I don't know if it's considered the best, but it's a prime example of amazing boss design. And that was all 17 Stellar Blade bosses ranked. If you enjoyed, leave your comments down below. I almost got through it without saying something controversial, but the Elden Ring topic is problematic. And if you don't think that's bad, remember to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed. Helps me a great deal. I am the Game Analyst, and don't forget, sometimes you want things to be done poorly. It gives you stuff to say. Oh, what? You're actually here? That's fucking amazing. I guess you may as well check out the main channel, in which I discuss movies, TV series, and the offensive topics that lie within. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's right there.